that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They are telling us that the fundamental rights that are envisioned by the founders in the first document that was used to create this country is based on the principle that you and I are, first and foremost, men and women that are endowed by our Creator God with certain unalienable rights. The third sentence in the Declaration says that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. The first half of that sentence tells us the purpose of government as envisioned by the Founding Fathers. It was to secure to every man, woman, and unborn child their God-given unalienable rights. There is no such obligation to secure rights to animals. The right only applies to men. The God-given unalienable rights only go to men. They do not go to animals. Insofar as the government can reduce us to the status of animals, they have no obligation to secure those rights to us. It's not an accident that they are talking about man or other animals in the federal law and in the Texas law. And we looked in 5 other states and found it in all 5 of the states we looked. And I presume that if you looked into the definition of drugs in any of the other 50 states, I presume that you would find it certainly in the majority and perhaps in every one of them. And incidentally, we've talked about this from time to time on the radio program, and I've had people contact me from England and also Australia who've looked at their drug laws, and they were much surprised to discover that their drug laws also presume the people to be animals.
Wow. Do you think that it's strict? Is it confined just to drug law, or do you think that this is a problem that permeates all levels of government and all regulatory agencies? I mean, do you think
we don't know how far this goes? But here's the thing. Here's well, we've also found the definition again in Texas Health and Safety Code, and in the federal code at Title 21 we found this definition of drugs, which refers to man or other animals. So we've found it at Texas, we found it in the United States Code at Title 21, but we've also later found it at Title 7, which deals with which is the Agriculture Code. And they define animals to include man. I think it's Title 7, and it might be section, no, I can't remember what section it is right off the top of my head. But nevertheless, the definition in the Agricultural Code also defines man to be an animal. All right. This is widespread, and we've traced it back to the earliest instance I've been able to find is the 1906 Pure Food and Drug Act.
Yes.
1906. They have been doing this for a century.
That's right.
Understand that? The government has been operating on the presumption that you and I are nothing but livestock for a century.
I totally believe it. As a matter of fact, I would expect it. Nothing surprises me now, I have to say.
I understand, but
And when we come back, we're going to continue our conversation with Alfred Adask and get into some very interesting territory, especially when it comes to the Food and Drug Administration. So stay tuned, sit tight. When we come back, we'll get this party started. There are times when I just want to scream at the top of my lungs, and I cannot get the message across to you folks enough that it's going to take a concerted effort on all of our parts to get out there and really make a difference out there. Our guest tonight, Alfred Adask, is here, and he's just what an amazing story and what a fantastic defense. And it makes me bring up this article here, Alfred, because this has really got my attention. And it was when the raw milk problem was going on with the Amish. The FDA says you have no right to real food unless they give you permission first. And I want to give my audience a little background on it. In response to a lawsuit filed by the Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund, the FDA has articulated its belief that there is no such thing as a right to health or to purchase or consume any given food. The FTC LDF has sued the FDA for banning the interstate shipment of sale of raw milk products, alleging that the policy deprives consumers and a food buying group owner of their fundamental and inalienable rights of A, traveling across state lines with raw dairy products legally obtained and possessed, B, providing for the care and well-being of themselves and their families, including their children, and C, producing, obtaining, and consuming the foods of choice for themselves and their families, including their children. In response, now this is what gets me, in response, the FDA countered that, quote, there is no deeply rooted historical tradition of unfettered access to foods of all kinds. As evidence for this position, the agency cites, quote, the dietary law of biblical times, which is an absolute travesty because the government trashes the Bible at any chance they get, and now they're using it as a reference? Unbelievable. But it goes on. It says, the FDA goes further, stating that, quote, there is no absolute right to consume or feed children any particular kind of food because comprehensive federal regulation of the food supply has been in effect at least since Congress enacted the Pure Food and Drugs Act of 1906. Thus, plaintiffs' claim to a fundamental privacy interest in obtaining foods of their own choice for themselves and their families is without merit. And they go on to say there is no generalized right to bodily and physical health. What's your thoughts on that, Alfred?
Well, it's true if you're an animal.
Well,
Government's telling you the exact truth. If you're an animal, and if you're willing to accept that, if you're willing to accept the theory of evolution, for example. I was on a program with a lady in California. She has a radio program, and she is a biologist. She has a degree in biology, written a couple of books. She is a staunch believer in the theory of evolution. But here's the problem with it, and she's a very intelligent woman. All right, as are a lot of people who believe in the theory of evolution. But here is the problem. If you believe in evolution, you're an animal. You were evolved from apes, evolved from monkeys, evolved from, lemurs and rodents and whatever. You are nothing but an animal. If you can't get hold of that theory of creation in the Bible, you have no right to liberty. You are nothing but an animal, and there's no other way to grab hold of that right, or that unalienable right to liberty, other than to declare yourself to be a man who is made in God's image and endowed by your Creator with certain unalienable rights. If you're going to accept that theory of evolution, the people that accept it, they have intelligence, so on, they are the ones that ultimately lay the foundation for concentration camps, mass killings, people being robbed, exploited, abused, whatever, oppressed by their government. It's all okay if we're all animals. If we're all animals, we live in a world where might makes right. If we are, on the other hand, men and women made in God's image and given dominion over the animals, and we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, in that theory, right makes might. Completely opposite. Which world do you want to live in? The part of the point here is that the theory of evolution is not merely a scientific theory. It has profound political and even spiritual implications.
Sure.
All right? And insofar as people are compelled by government to learn it and accept it and just taken for granted, well, we're all evolved from animals. Yeah, then you are an animal. And if you are, government can treat you like a chicken on a Tyson poultry processing plant. They can trim your little beak off if that's what they need to do, and they can pack you into where you are elbow to elbow with all the rest of the chickens, and you can't hardly stand it. And as soon as you're fat enough, they're going to harvest you and do whatever they got to do with you. You have to, and it goes to this man or other animals concept. And again, we found it in England, found it in Australia, or it's been reported to me. I didn't find it, but other people have reported they found the same thing. It's evidence that the New World Order is based on the fundamental premise that the people of the world are nothing but animals. And this premise, although it's in the law, nobody's understood it. To the best of my knowledge, again, in 100 years, it's been in the Pure Food and Drug Act. so far as I know, started out in 1906. In 2006, 100 years later, to the best of my knowledge, I'm the first layman to read the law and realize what it meant. I'm sure there's other people in positions of power who understood what it meant, but they never talked about it to the public.
Wow. Hey, Gwen, do you have anything to add to this conversation? Okay. Thank you, Gwen.
Well, here, let me give you, I'll give you something now. Here's the significance, unless we're ready to take a break.
No, we're good. Go ahead.
The great significance of this is this definition of drugs.
Yes.
Is not just relevant to this particular case in colloidal silver. This definition of drugs is the cornerstone on which President Nixon built the war on drugs that was initiated in 1971. The whole war on drugs presumes the people to be animals. The war on drugs laid the foundation for much of the modern police state. Probably half the business police do right now is involved in drug-related offenses.
Yes.
And all of that is ultimately based on a definition of drugs that presumes the people to be animals. The police departments and the growth of the police state laid the foundation for the prison industrial complex, where we jail more people than any other country on the face of the earth. Again, that's based, 70% of the people in federal prison are allegedly there on drug-related crimes. They wouldn't be there if they could properly defend themselves as men rather than animals. All of this is based on a couple of words, a handful of words found in the definitions. And if you can challenge these effectively, you can threaten the police state. The war on drugs dies. The police state is reduced in half. The prison industrial complex all of a sudden becomes essentially vacant warehouses. What are you going to put there if you don't have drug users? I mean,
That's
this
true.
is all based on a definition, and the definition can't withstand. You put a jury on the case, and if you've got any Christians or Jews on the case or on the jury, and you tell them, look, you can't be an animal. All right, can't be, and hang on to your faith, they will not vote to convict. The whole thing dies if people understand the spiritual implications of a government calling you an animal.
It is. It is just I mean, it's how profound is that? That is absolutely mind-boggling. And
that's why they had to drop the case against us.
They absolutely.
The political implications were so enormous that they couldn't dare take the case in front of a jury. They'd lose the drug war. They'd lose the police state. They'd lose the prison industrial complex. Big money, tons of steel and concrete go into those prisons. All that stops. All right? If somebody gets into the court and says, I'm not an animal, and the jury says, yeah, buddy, you're not. Let me tell you another one. You can go to an organization called genocidewatch.org. It's on the internet. And if you do, there's a tab up on top that says About Genocide. Click on it, and down below you'll find a document called 8 Stages of Genocide. The law on genocide is that it's not necessary to actually kill anyone to be guilty of genocide. If you merely create conditions where it's more likely that a person or a group of people will die, that constitutes an act of genocide. Nobody actually has to die. But if you've created conditions where it's more likely they'll die, then that is an act of genocide. They list 8 stages of genocide, and stage number 3 is dehumanization. And it says, and I'm reading it right now, it says, one group denies the humanity of the other group. Members of it are equated with animals, vermin, insect, or diseases. All right? They go on. The first thing the Hutus do when they decide to chop up the Tutsis over in Africa is they declare the Tutsis are nothing but animals. If they're nothing but animals, you can kill the women, you can kill the children, you can kill the non-combatants, you can exterminate them all like a hive of wasps or a nest of rats. You can kill them all if they're nothing but animals. When Adolf Hitler got involved with the Jews and the Nazis, of course, during World War II, one of the first things they did is they declared by law that the Jews were Untermenschen, meaning subhuman, less than human, animals.
Yeah, and that's what's happening here in the United States. When we come back, it'll be our final segment with Alfred Adask. So stay tuned, folks. Don't go away. We'll be right back. You're listening to Freedom Link Radio on the Orion Talk Radio Network and Micro 1650 AM. Stay tuned.